the front of everything,
Yeah.
and then
They're gonna, I understood
what
that
they're
somebody was gonna propose that the CAT committee have like members of the public, and after you leave, they'll just put you back.
Sanchez?
Yeah.
Doing well.
Put you back
How are
on.
you, sir? It- It's kind of strange. I know the feeling, not being around for a while.
All right, you're live.
I wonder what it costs to put this together.
That stuff is expensive. If you ever
Export it to a different.
You gotta go downstairs and get a job.
Export it to a comma delimited, and then import it as a spreadsheet again. And then, you have all the data in there. It's just,
But I don't
You got
know.
mine?
I don't think so, no. I haven't heard from them today.
well, and if you open another spreadsheet, you don't have that issue. Right. Well, and then you can go back to, it was from Joe or Joanzik? It was what? Oh, okay. Maybe go back and say, hey, can I get an unprotected version so I can manipulate it?
Oh, here we are. Morning. Fine.
Morning.
Hey, Mike.
Morning, Chris.
Hey, Roger.
Hey. Hey. Know who that lady is? She represents the Fox Valley Manufacturing or something like that.
Oh, okay.
It was a setup yesterday. He was telling about how we weren't doing their job, and little Barbie jumped in and said, why did these people have to come? Why didn't we all bring them here? I'm thinking, give me a break. They can't read the newspaper or what's going on.
All right, it's 9 o'clock, so I'll call the meeting of the Kane County CARES Act Allocation Committee to order. Ask that the clerk please call the roll.
Hanson,
Hanson here.
Kenyon,
And in here.
Braz, Sanchez,
Here.
Surges, Thomas. Okay, motion.
All right, we have a quorum. First item of business is approval of the minutes of the September 4th meeting. Entertain a motion to approve those minutes. Mr. Hanson moves, Mr. Sanchez seconds. Any corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges, Thomas.
All right, minutes are approved. Public comment, is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the committee this morning? Anyone online? Okay. Hearing none, we'll go through our discussion item, status of funds. Mr. Rickard?
Good morning.
Morning.
We would like to go through the fund balance. Currently, the beginning balance was $92,900,217.90. We've accrued to date $111,675.21 in interest. We've dispersed $8.4 million, $8,308.80 for an ending balance of $84,603,584.31.
All right, any questions regarding status of funds? The interest component is going into the contingency fund for purpose of future allocation, which we'll discuss later on in the meeting this morning. Any questions of our treasurer? Hearing none, just a review of the application and process and timeframe. We have in this process set up a number of different programs, and it's my understanding that the timeframe for acceptance of applications is now complete in every category. And each category is going through a vetting process based on information that's provided. Just to give a little bit of background, as the applications are received, they're initially reviewed by our staff for completeness, and if the applications are not complete, then the applicant is requested to provide supplemental information so that the complete packet of application documents can be sent on then to our consultant for review. The consultant reviews the applications and then makes a determination or recommendation, actually, as to whether the requested expenditures qualify under the parameters set forth in our program as well as the federal requirements. And then once that qualification determination is made, a notice is sent back to the applicant, and then subsequently, once the expenditures have been incurred or appropriate vouchers are in place, the applicant would then send those back and request reimbursement. Now, because we have different stages of applications and programs that closed out earlier, for example, the municipal program closed out September 4th, we'll be moving forward approval of the disbursements through this committee on a rolling basis as we receive confirmation that the applications are complete and that the requested funds are appropriate. I think the committee's received from staff some initial preliminary information regarding the municipal applications. For example, you would see on the sheet regarding the municipal applications that all but a few of the municipalities have maxed out their allocation of funds. There are a few municipalities that didn't make a request for funds or didn't use all their funds. And with respect to those, we've reached out to those municipalities to see if they plan on requesting information. And it's my understanding that if we don't hear from them by October 15th, then the assumption is that they won't be applying. So that's where we stand to date as far as that's concerned. So regarding the application process and time frame, again, we've closed out the applications for the programs. There is the most recent programs that closed out were the small business program and the not-for-profit programs, and those staff is in the process of going through those. Given the volume of business applications, the work is a little bit more tedious than the others, and there's additional information that's being requested. So staff is working through that process as quickly as possible. Likewise, with the not-for-profit request, there was 53 not-for-profit requests, and we'll get feedback on that in the next week or so in terms of what was requested and what additional documentation we may need. Ultimately, with respect to the next item, the timing of distributions, once everything is properly vetted, then we've authorized previously the state's attorney's office with verification from the treasurer and the auditor that the funds can be released as soon as the appropriate documentation is provided by the applicants. So that's the background on the programs. Are there any questions on the procedural side at this point before we get into specific numbers? Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hoshait. I understand that the process is applicant applies, after review, a recommendation is made by KEB, then it goes back to the applicant for production of the invoices for the reimbursement. The recommendation is probably a go or no-go from KEB. And then is it a recommendation, or as I believe that the resolution says that it's approval from the state's attorney's office as far as whether these expenses are reimbursable or not. So by when in the process do we get decisions? Because a recommendation then implies that there's a further approval. Can you clarify that for us? As far as the state's attorneys, by when do these different groups get the go-ahead from basically the accounting firm and the state's attorney's office?
Well, it's a rolling process. So for example, the municipalities who have submitted their applications and provided documentation and requests for expenses that were deemed appropriate, they've been already notified that their application is approved, or that we have everything they need, and that we're not suggesting that anything isn't appropriate. And then, of course, once we vote to disperse the funds here as we go through the process, then they'll just have to submit their invoices and get reimbursement. So I'm aware of, with respect to the business program, the same process is underway. Applicants submitted their application. If all the information was there, if it wasn't there, we're asking for more information. If the information was there and they're qualified, there's rolling letters going out telling them that their application has been preliminarily approved, subject to providing the supporting documentation. So that's an ongoing process.
Okay. And then as far as the county offices, thank you for that clarification. As far as the county offices, the agencies and departments, they've had amounts approved, projects approved. By when will they receive notification that KEB and the state's attorney's office have approved the eligibility?
Yeah, the county requests really can be broken down into three components. There is the payroll component, the request for reimbursement for payroll. There is the non-payroll requests that were incurred or expenditures that were incurred prior to, I believe it's July 31st, but somewhere in that area. And then there's the non-payroll requests that haven't been incurred that would be incurred between August 1st and the end of the year. Each process is a little bit different. The wage component has not yet been formally approved, but that's the easiest to approve given the fact that the guidelines from the federal government were clarified. It's my understanding that the Finance Department is working with the state's attorney's office and KEB to provide the requested information. Mr. Ronzik and I have had discussions regarding this. I think the payroll request for the period of time earlier in the year has been completed. He's in the process of putting together, and it's being done in blocks of time. The most recent quarter or the most recent period information is now available. Mr. Onzik's formulating that, and that'll go in. And then finally, there's going to be a projected payroll. So actually, what we're doing is submitting technically two components of the application for payroll. Payroll incurred to date, and then future payroll. And so that information is on its way as soon as it's available. We have a commitment from the state's attorney's office and KEB to process that as soon as it gets there, but usually that process takes a few days to a week, plus or minus, for approval. And I believe that's the biggest part of our request, is really the payroll side of it. That's the part that impacts the budget. I know that there was a request about how soon can we get approval, because the budget that we're proposing assumes that the expenses that we're asking for reimbursement for are going to be improved. And I have a commitment to get that as soon as we can, but we need to provide the information internally to be vetted, and there's a commitment to get that vetted right away. With respect to the other two components of the county application, with respect to the non-payroll items that have been incurred prior to July 31st, that actually has gone through the preliminary vetting process, and KEB has sent back requests for additional documentation. They've made a preliminary determination, breaking it down into three categories: approved, and I'm paraphrasing here, likely to be approved but need additional information, and then questionable but need additional information. And so that's back in our staff's hands and the department heads requesting the additional information so they can get feedback for the purpose of clarifying it. Again, the purpose of the vetting process is to create an audit-worthy set of documents that supports the funding that we're giving. And so that's underway right now. With respect to the future non-payroll expenses, that list has been submitted and is in the process of going through the same review process. So it's basically information as it's received being put in there. I was involved in a video conference with representatives of KEB and the state's attorney's office earlier this week, and impressed upon them the fact that we now are in this time crunch, and we want to make sure that priority is given at least to the county side of this. Now we're through the municipal side. The county information, we've got to push to move that forward. We have another meeting scheduled for the middle part of next week to follow up on what's happened since this week, and so we'll have more feedback shortly.
Okay, thank you very much. And the KEB either approved, roughly approved, likely to be approved, or still questionable, need to provide more information. Is that the same process and time frame for the state's attorney's office?
Yes, and they're working in conjunction with
Got
each
it.
other. But
Yes. So it's
at this point, I guess ultimately what could happen is we could be in a position where we have a specific item that's been requested that comes back as questionable, and then the ultimate determination is not made by a third. It's ultimately the board to decide.
Yes.
So far on the municipal side, that got through because, and I think the reason most of that came through as determined to be eligible was because of the clarification on the federal government side, and most of that was payroll related.
Okay. By the way, the board approved after those recommendations. Hasn't the board already approved the, at least the non-payroll items, the Schedule A, those lists?
Yeah, we've approved that as our requested application, yes.
Okay, so that's just the application, then it goes through the process, and then it gets approval again.
Right.
Okay. And so the time frame is a few days to a week after it's the pieces are received.
That's on the payroll side, okay? Now, the non-payroll side, in terms of components, the non-payroll, the first batch was only, I don't want to say only because it's a lot of money, but it was less than 10% of our total requests because it was previously expended items that we're seeking reimbursement for. That we submitted, we got feedback. It's really incumbent on our staff to give them information back as soon as possible so they can speed that process up.
Okay, good. And then what's the anticipated action when something is not approved? For instance, when there were, and I'm sorry that in the coroner's area, there were two expensive vehicles, two TWO, where one was approved, but one wasn't. Two were ordered, each was $175,000. If they fail to be approved by either the CAC committee or by the KEB or State's Attorney's Office, what then happens to an obligation that's already made, but now how will that be paid?
Well, that would be like any other expenditure. I mean, this committee is, it would be subject to whatever restrictions existed on an elected office that incurred expenditures with or without budget approval. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily tied in here. What we did is there was a request for two items. We approved one. If another has been purchased, then that has to be dealt with in their other budget, I would expect.
Okay, so perhaps through Finance Committee,
Yes.
that second one, and I know
Or
that
judicial public safety first and then the finance, right.
okay, and then some action, I think that we were talking about this maybe 3 weeks ago, the idea of notifying the manufacturer and then going through the steps to cancel that order. Anyway, those kinds of, for every application that is denied, there will be that follow-up steps and financial exposure.
Right.
Is that right? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that covers item B and C. Any questions on the process so far? I mean, there's a lot of work going on now. The applications are in. I do want to talk now about the next item is Kane's share for the unincorporated area, and we confirmed at a prior meeting that those funds were put back into the contingency fund. At this point in time, the contingency fund for unallocated uses was originally $5 million. Given the expenditures that we approved on the county side, that was taken down to 4.5 million. And then we've got about 3.5 million in funds from the township or the unincorporated areas that are back. So roughly $8 million in unallocated funds. And I want to next get into a discussion about where we're at with applications, where we may have shortfalls, where we may have overages, and develop a plan for how we're going to deal with these additional funds, because we're farther along in the process now, and we know where we're at. Initially, we all have received the sheets showing the, let's focus on the program where we had set aside $1.25 million for, originally for Park District Forest Preserve was one component. Townships was another component, and then later on in the process, we added library districts to the application process. All of those applications have been submitted and vetted. Actually, the amounts eligible have been determined, and although we had 1.25 as our limit, the collective requests came in roughly $600,000 more than we had allocated. Okay, now, and when I say the requests came in, not only did the requests come in, but the determined to be eligible reimbursable expenses came back at an amount $600,000 more than the 1.25 that we allocated. The committee's prerogative and the board's prerogative is to either go through and saying that we originally set aside a certain amount of money and pare down the requests, which is one process we can do. That's what we do at the Riverboat Committee when there's grant requests that are made. The other option is, in the environment that we're in with the timing we're in, is to use some of that money that was in the contingency fund to make up that difference to fully fund these allocations. Mr. Surgis?
Chairman, if I can, I'm just trying, I'm not trying to cause trouble, but I need just some clarity. if Chairman Lawson, you just mentioned that, and I'm just going to use for example, because I had motioned for it, the 2 vehicles for the coroner's office. And during one of these such meetings, Sheriff Hayne had come forward and said, while your committee had only approved 1 vehicle, we had, under our authority, gone ahead and approved both vehicles. But my point being, if we're to the point in the process where the contingency was at 5 and then it was 4.9 something, but now we didn't get all these requests, so we're up to 8 and we're about ready to spend those monies, we're not suggesting that we're not going to fund things such as the 2 vehicles that were purchased under the emergency, or are we? I'm just trying to, and what's that number and should it be built into this? And I'm not advocating either way. I'm just asking, how are we handling that? Are we just sidestepping that, or are we?
Well, that's certainly an action this committee can take. I think what we'd like to do, and because this is, like I say, a rolling process, but I think is, now that we have applications in under certain programs, and we know what's been requested, when we formed the program, we didn't know what was going to come in terms of requests. We know what eligible expenditures are. As those are ready to go forward, it's appropriate for us to consider that. There will be a time in this process, just based on sheer numbers here, that in all likelihood, there'll be funds left over that we can allocate to county programs or other municipal programs, including if the board's inclination is to do so, to pay for that other vehicle, if that's the will of the committee and the board, assuming that vehicle qualifies. Okay, so that's something we could consider doing at some point.
Do we know if I can put all of those in a bucket? Do we know how big that bucket is?
No.
Are we only talking about, a couple $100,000, or is that $7 million?
What, I don't understand your question.
If
Right now,
items-
we have $8 million in
No,
contingency
if the
funds.
items such as those things that the department heads thought were emergencies and were ordered, even though they hadn't been approved, how big is that variance, if you will? Am I saying that correctly?
Well, on the amounts incurred to date, that the amounts requested to date is $1.1 million.
Okay.
And that's the feedback we got, where they're asking additional questions. The additional items requested, which are current and future expense or capital type items or projects that we felt were COVID related, that's in the several $1 million category. And so but we had not, as a county, over requested. We requested, in fact, we had a county allocation, and the reason the contingency fund went from 5 to 4.5 is that we used 500 of that. Okay.
Right.
So now we're out, the county is requesting 100% of the funds that the board chose to allocate to the county. What will happen is, if all of those are approved, they'll get funded. If some of them come back as questionable, then we have to consider, make a determination. So the result of that would be that we would have, let's just say there was one expenditure we chose not to fund because it didn't meet the criteria. That would add money back to the contingency fund. So if funding that additional vehicle, if that's your question, I thought we're beyond that.
Yeah,
But- But if you want to fund an additional vehicle, there are funds to do that in the
I thought we were
contingency
beyond it
fund.
as well, but if the chairman has brought that up and we haven't, then let's address it. And is that vehicle part of a bucket of money that's a great big huge bucket, or a little bitty bucket that's insignificant? And I mean, every penny.
I'm not aware of any other expenditures that were incurred by the county or committed to that weren't included in our vetted applications other than that vehicle.
That's all I was going for. Thank you.
But I don't want to get stalled on that issue here.
The question, to focus the question and appreciate the clarification, and not easy to figure out, well, okay, how do you sift all this down to a final product? The question is, we have the list, the board has approved like the application. I understand that a little bit better now. Now, what the agencies and department heads are waiting for is KEB and the state's attorney's office's approval that these are eligible expenses. I know that there are a request for scores of additional detail, and I'm hoping that all that's necessary, because I don't think that we have a fixed fee on, for instance, the KEB engagement. And from a person who used to charge a fixed fee for his accounting services, I think that these folks are by the hour, more complicated, more time, more billing. We want to make sure we don't go into that kind of billing trap. But it's by when will the agency and department heads have approval from KEB and state's attorney's office. It's the by when you get that answer that then will determine the size of the bucket as you're referring to, and then you take that management by exception. So, and on the one piece, I understand that it's a rolling process, but we already have Exhibit A for the county and for the departments and the agencies. So I would think that one's, an established list, several times that's been, issued to everybody, and it has been approved, if I'm not mistaken, by the board. And so now it's KEB, State's Attorney's Office, please give us your approval or a very definite list of what we have to provide, follow-up information. Once we get that approval, my guess is that we take it maybe to this committee and then to the board, and then it's finished.
Correct.
Okay, so the question is by when the Exhibit A for I think it's the non-payroll that's been established and approved by the board.
And we've already answered that question. The first is in the feedback stage, the first component. The second component is being reviewed right now, and that information will come back to our staff in the next few weeks. I'll have, like I say, I've got another meeting next week. I'll have a better handle on precise timeframes as we go through these meetings.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get back to where we were at before. We have a program for other units of government other than cities and villages, where we had 1.25 million in eligible or in allocated funds. There's been requests for roughly 1.85 million. That's a $600,000 overage. The committee could choose a couple routes. One is to, knowing that we've got eligible requests, and we in fact expanded the scope by including library districts in there. That was an additional $325,000. Do we shift that funds from the contingency fund to cover that difference? Or do you want to go through a process of vetting these and reducing the allocations to the applicants so that we we fit within the 1.25 that was originally allocated? Mr. Hanson?
For clarity, in looking at the spreadsheets that were provided last Friday, entailing the library requests and the other units of government, the townships and the preserve, I only came up with 1.5. I didn't know if there is a different spreadsheet or.
The numbers that I have show that the eligible expenses from the Park District and the Forest Preserve was $821,000 roughly. The amount from the townships and, I'm sorry, Park Districts was 821, Townships and Forest Preserve District was 698, and then the Library Districts was 325. I believe the correct number is 596,000. Mr. Onzik, that was a number that I believe that's accurate, correct, Fabiola? All right. So those are the numbers that were over. And again, if the committee wants to, my recommendation would be that we strongly consider funding the shortfall from the contingency fund That was really the purpose of this, to see if we had legitimate requests for expenditures and that we increase the funding for this program. But it's up to the will of the committee, and if we were going to do that, we'd need to make a motion. Mr. Surges?
Fav, if I can ask you, so on that email that came out with the 3 or 4 spreadsheets on it, and Matt, if I read that right, for the unincorporated areas, there was a 1.25 available, and they were only like at $700,000 or $800,000 because several hadn't even requested. So we should have taken all of those and aggregated them from each spreadsheet.
No, there were actually,
The 1.25 available?
there was a 1.25 million allocation for 3 components collectively.
Collectively, that's what I'm saying,
Right.
aggregate them up. Got it.
Right.
Got it.
And if we did that, you would have seen a total of 1.85
In my mind, I did not aggregate those to one thing. I looked at 3 separate spreadsheets. And
Correct.
And John, I would motion to move forward with taking that from the contingency fund.
Okay. So the motion is to supplement the fund that was made available for the park districts, the townships and forest preserve district, and the library district by increasing it by $596,410.79, so that all of the amounts that were deemed eligible could be satisfied. Mr. Surges moves that. Mr. Sanchez seconds. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor, or clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Yeah, I guess I still have, discussion's over. Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Sturgis,
Yes.
Thomas.
Okay. Motion carries. I would suggest that we have a resolution to modify the program to increase the funding amount that would be moved forward to the board for consideration. I also would think that the entities that have applied would be very satisfied with that approach because we've taken care of that
For
request. Mr. Hanson?
Just real quick, just for clarity, I mean, I'm in support of fully funding these 3 programs using contingency money, but wasn't there a separate tranche, if you will, for the park districts that was independent of the others?
No. All right, next item, going through the applications, we have the Fire Protection District applicants. This is a scenario where we had allocated $1,350,000 to the fire protection districts. Primarily, the districts cover a lot of the unincorporated areas because many of the fire districts or fire protection services in municipalities are provided by a municipal district. So the amount of requests in total was over $7 million. The amount of eligible requests was almost $6 million. So we've got 1.35 million in funds allocated. In terms of eligible amounts, we have 6 million. So there's a $4.65 million shortfall in terms of items, funds requested and funds available. Now, what we, again, with respect to this category, we could make the determination that we're going to keep the cap where it is and go through a process of allocating in which we would go through each line item and make recommendations. Or alternatively, we could attempt to supplement this fund in part through some of the funds that are in the contingency fund. In evaluating this, I did, trying to sort through this, we did recognize that originally we had planned on 3.6 million roughly being allocated from to the development committee to evaluate unincorporated needs. And that money is in the contingency fund. If the fire our protection district needs are covering those areas, and we don't have any other specific requests for those areas because the townships and the other units of government have been taken care of. One approach could be to say, what we're going to do is supplement this fund with the money that came back to us from the unincorporated areas, because that specifically would apply to those areas. But I'll just open that up for discussion now. And, you know, if we were to do that, we wouldn't completely cover the shortfall. But what we would do is be in a position where instead of being 4.65 short, we would be roughly $1 million short, plus or minus. Yes.
I am admittedly not well-versed with fire protection districts, but the numbers seem wildly diverse on some of these. And Fav, I don't have answers, I just have questions. But is it based on geo area? Is it based on, I mean, how are some of these well over $1 million and some of them are 100,000? Was there a rhyme or reason there? Or, and I'm not educated. I'm not poking. I'm just saying I don't get it. Just the size. Okay. 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 Thank you.
All right. What is the committee's pleasure as it relates to this item?
What are the other considerations for using the unutilized unincorporated areas? Are there other considerations, whether it be internally from Director Jeffers or the sheriff for those areas, or is this the only option in front of us right now?
All right, so let's just talk in terms of total numbers. There's $8 million now in contingency. That may be supplemented, and when we get to talk about the business program, that'll be one thing. But my expectation is that, although we don't know, there's a couple things we don't know. We don't know the total amount requested on the not-for-profit requests, and that's in part due to the fact that the way the applications were submitted, it's not clear what certain not-for-profits are asking for. We're seeking clarification on that, but we'll know that we allocated $2 million there. 50 applications may be more or less than 2 million, but let's assume that's fully subscribed. On the business side, we had 253 applicants, I believe. If we assume that the applications were for the most that you could apply for, that would be roughly $5 million, and we had allocated $8 million to that program. We have to discuss in this meeting what we're going to do. There could be additional funds that would be available for that. With the action this committee just took to allocate another $600,000 roughly to the other units of government, right now we've got $7,400,000 in requests. To answer your specific question, we need to come up with $7.4 million in other expenditures to fully invest the funds that were given to us between now and, I mean, soon. And so the issue is, I mean, the potential for that is, could we add county requests? Yes. Could we add money to the municipal allocations? We could do that. Could we use some of it to make up the shortfall in the fire protection districts? Yes, but that's a substantial sum of money that we need to allocate. And as we did, and we have a decision, I guess, to make. So that's the population of potential items. I envisioned that when we got to this point in the process, we would be looking at those that were over applied for, those that were under applied for, and shift funds as we deemed appropriate. So you certainly can say yes or no, or come up with another idea, but we need ideas to get these funds allocated sooner rather than later.
So just to follow chronology, we started at 5 million in contingency. We just added 3 million from where?
We started at 5 million, we subtracted 500,000 to get to 4.5 when we did our county request. We added 3.5 from the township funds.
Got it.
And if,
Small business funds.
and there could be more money coming from the small business funds coming back on top of that. The 7.4 million that's available right now, we subtracted 600 because we just allocated that.
Got it.
And now we're 7.4. Now, if you wanted, I mean, if we were dealing with an equity argument here, one could argue that that 3.4 million that was to be allocated on a per capita basis to the unincorporated areas should remain allocated to those areas, just like in Geneva. Geneva had a head count. Their fire department was taken care of in those funds. So if we're taking those back, it may make sense to allocate those to the shortfall in the fire districts, because those would be the unincorporated areas. That's why I brought that issue up, but we certainly can do that, or we're open to discussion on other options. Even if we did that, there's still significant funds left over that we're going to have to allocate. The benefit of allocating them to known applicants that have been vetted and are qualified is that we don't have to go back for requalification. We know the needs there, and the requests qualify for funding.
So of the asking for additional township, I'm sorry, library districts, fire protection districts, is there a third one?
No. We just got through library
I got it.
districts, park districts, and townships.
Right, is there a third one asking?
No, now we're in a separate category completely.
Understood. Understood. So
There's 1.25 that was allocated to the three groups. There's 1,350,000 that was allocated to the fire protection districts. That's what we're focused on now.
got it. Is there going to be an additional one asking?
There's 2 million that was allocated for not-for-profits. There's 8 million that was allocated for business grants. Those are the ones that are in the queue. They aren't as far along because the deadline for filing for those other areas lapsed,
Got it. And
just more recently.
I can hear your frustration. I'm sorry.
No, I'm not trying to get to that point.
I'm just going, so I'm looking at these from the spreadsheets from Friday, saying,
Right.
was there a third one in there, and was that third one at a deficiency that we're being asked to fund into?
There were 4 sheets from Friday. We covered 3 of them already. The 4th sheet is the one that we're discussing right now.
Got it.
That's the fire protection districts. The application for fire protection districts was 1.35 million. That's what we allocated to the fund. There's 6 million in qualified eligible expenses. And the question again is, do we stay at 1.35 or do we fund the shortfall with some of the contingency funds? Mr. Martin.
I'm not on the committee, but just to offer an opinion, the premise that I think is being indirectly raised here is that the fire protection districts are kind of hybridized. They're part rural, they're part municipal, and it seems to me that funding them is is low-hanging fruit as far as providing equity between the unincorporated area and the municipalities. And they are each fire protection district that includes a municipality in its boundary, each one operates at radically different levels, not levels, but organizational methods. And some places have more than one fire protection district. And I think that subsidizing the fire protection district request achieves some degree of parity between the various public bodies and would be an easy way to move that forward.
That's what I was trying to say in different words, but I appreciate your clarification.
Or repetition, whatever.
No, it was good. Thanks. Mr. Sanchez.
I'm more partial to make sure we have money for the nonprofits that are probably going to be asking for more than 2 million. But it sounds like we're going to have some extra money, even if we were to go ahead and provide all of these requests. So since we have that money, I'm not really hearing anything big that we'd be spending the contingency money on otherwise, unless somebody has something. But
Let me
I would be
make
in favor of this.
Let me make a suggestion here. Is that if a motion to advance this to carry out the concept that I had articulated and Mr. Martin clarified would be that we would vote to move 3.5 million from the contingency fund that came back from the township, or for the unincorporated areas, into this fire protection district fund. And that, by doing that, we would still be short roughly $1 million. I'm just trying to do the math. 4.65, we're short roughly $1 million. I think and then we would have to go through a process of perhaps reducing the request from the larger entities to make it fit within the available funds, okay? So for example, Huntley Fire Protection District is asking for has got 1.35 and so does Sugar Grove. If we were to, and Hampshire's almost $1 million. Everyone else is significantly less than that. What we could do is proportionately reduce those to make them fit within the category. But the first step would be to make a motion to move the 3.5, or the money that came back from the townships into the, or from the unincorporated areas into the fund for fire protection districts.
So moved.
Okay, Mr. Sanchez moves that. Is there a second? Mr. Surgis? And just to clarify then, that would be, there's $1,350,000 in the fund. Right now, we would be adding $3,594,136 to that. So some quick math here would say that that would be $4,994,136 if I'm accurate. All right, is there any further discussion on that motion?
Just for clarity, the money that's unutilized or being returned, that was the unincorporated areas per capita amount.
Correct.
So this wasn't a separate program. This is money that was equitably given out to the unincorporated areas that has not been utilized yet.
And we're, I guess, and to finish that, equitably reinvesting in those
Yes.
areas. Yes, okay. Further discussion? Clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
All right, the motion carries. Where that leaves us with the fire protection districts is now we have a larger pool of funds. We're still about $1 million short. And I don't know if the committee wants to go through a process now or if we want to set this over for, we're far along. They're all eligible. We just need to tell the fire districts what we have done. We're going to need to reduce those requests to fit within our available funding unless there was a thought that we would further supplement it. But I sense that from the reservation of the committee, not knowing where we're going with the other items, we have left in the contingency fund about $3.9 million right now to allocate to certain programs. So the issue is, do we supplement this fund and make it whole, or do we wait? And if we're going to wait, I think what we should then go is through a vetting process or a allocation process to determine where the funds get allocated among the districts. What's the will of the committee? Mr. Hanson.
It's my feeling to, and I don't want to sit around and wait, but let's get a better look at the completion of the review of the internal request from the county.
All right.
Let's get a better feel for what the approved, or I should say eligible requests are from non-for-profits and for business. And also to cycle back one more time, if you will, to the departments that may have the biggest variables between now and the end of the year. That could be our clerk's office and especially our health department, Barb Jeffers.
All right, right now, we've got, by passing the motion that we just passed, we've got 83% of the funds that are requested. One approach would be to just say, we're going to go down the eligible list and we're going to fund 83% across the board. Another approach would be to say, we're going to reduce those that had the higher applications, first, to make sure those that had lower amounts get covered completely. That's a procedural approach. Either approach is really within our policy-making prerogative. If we want to do the 80, just do it on a percentage basis, we would have a motion to do that and do it on a percentage basis and fund everyone 83%. If we want to go through a process of reducing some of the larger ones, then what I would say is we would take the applications, every committee member would make recommendations that we would bring back, and we'd average those and move forward with a recommendation onto the full board. What's the will of the committee?
John, I don't want to split hairs on this. I would say the 83% is just the cleanest way to do that. And
Right. Is that your motion?
that's my motion.
Is there a second?
Is that for all the applicants or the two big ones?
For all the applicants?
All the applicants. I mean, if there's additional funds in a week or 2 weeks, we can go ahead and fund the remainder.
I agree with it at face value. There were a couple applicants in there that only took a percentage of their payroll. And I think they were modest in their request, and I don't want to trim them when other folks went after their entire payroll. That's what I'm thinking, but.
If you can find a fair way to do that, I'm more than happy.
Right.
And maybe staff wants to chime in and say how.
I think that's, it's not the staff's prerogative, really, that's our decision, Cliff. So I would say, that's really the articulation of the two options. Across the board is across the board.
I guess my point was being if tearing these apart is going to take 3 weeks, but doing it at 83% can be done in a day, and we're in a time crunch, then you have to go that route.
I don't think it'd take 3 weeks. It would require us to fill out the forms and submit them to staff so that they could, we could do it in 48 hours if we
Okay.
felt it appropriate.
And that's what I'm asking. That's,
Yeah. But your approach is the most prompt. Mr. Martin?
83% of $1 million is a lot more than 83% of 100,000. So to some degree, Matt's concern is addressed by the sheer arithmetic applied to it, if that brings people closer to a consensus.
It is a more significant reduction in terms of gross dollars from the larger applicants. So we have Mr. Surgis has made a motion to do it at 83%. Do we have a second to that motion? Mr. Kenyon? Further discussion?
Question.
Yes.
Okay, just clarification, we're talking about funds going to the library districts, art protection,
All right, just to recap where we were. Earlier in the meeting, we added money to the townships, the forest preserves, and the library districts. That was 600,000. Now we're focused on the fire protection districts, and we've already voted to shift an additional 3.5 million to them out of the township allocated per capita funds. Now we're voting on a motion to, because we don't have enough money to completely fund those, to fund them all at 83%, knowing that if we still have money left over in the end, because that other 17% is all eligible, we could add that back out of contingency if we have leftover funds. That clear, Angie?
I agree with Matt that we should first attempt to make provide funding for those.
We can't hear Ms. Thomas.
I think we should attempt to make all of the eligible fire protection districts whole first. I agree with Mr. Hanson.
All right, well, I think
That's not what he said.
that's not what he said. If someone hasn't applied and we set notice to them and they chose not to apply, we can't force them to apply.
I think what Matt was saying is some people turned in their entire payroll, some people turned in a much lesser portion.
That was, just to add clarity to what I was trying to get at, in reviewing each one of the fire protection district applications, there were different approaches in each one. And some were very, the best word I've got is modest in their payroll request. Other ones sent their entire payroll our direction. So I'm not looking to make anyone whole, and I'm not looking to reach out to anyone that hasn't applied already.
What you are what you're proposing is fund the modest ones 100%, the more egregious ones, maybe not.
But I'm also not trying to drag the feet. I'm
I know, I don't know how to
okay
do
with
that.
83% across the board, knowing that
I don't know how to do that.
that's the quickest way to achieve this.
All right, if any further questions or comments? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Sanchez,
No.
Burgess,
Yes.
Thomas,
No.
O'Shea.
I don't need to vote because there's not a tie. The motion carries. And I would suggest that, just for the people who voted no, that if we approach this, there are additional funds that we could supplement back to the smaller departments in the end without having a major change out of contingency. I mean,
And there was a lot of cocktail napkin math going on here.
Right.
If there's a way for us to get an update for what that difference was.
sure, we'll get a spreadsheet out
Thank
based
you.
on that.
But roughly, we're talking 1.1-ish by my cocktail napkin.
Right.
Okay.
All right, so that takes care of our discussion regarding those entities. Let's focus now on the business grant program and the discussion we had yesterday at the county board meeting regarding expanding the permissible applicant pool to include the Valley Industrial Group. And obviously, everyone had an opportunity to hear the merits of the proposal for them. Personally, their organization, its long-standing existence and benefit it's provided seems to me to fall within the category that is akin to what chambers of commerce do. Although it isn't a chamber of commerce, but it is not for profit, as I understand, and it falls, and it does seem to have a pretty much countywide benefit. One of the concerns I had, as a practical matter, is if we made an expansion of the program to include them, there would be two concerns. One is, do we have, because that falls within the business grant program, does it exclude other businesses from receiving grants? And based on the number of applications we received so far from the business grant, I don't think that's a problem because there should be additional funds available. The other question is if we make the exception for this entity, are there other similar entities that are going to come to us and make a request to be included? And I don't know of any, but I'll just open it up to discussion from them. If we were going to follow up on what was proposed at the board meeting, we would endorse the request to include this organization. Can I ask one question before we go into this discussion? I don't, and I should know the answer to this, but I don't. What was the amount requested in terms of a grant from the gross dollar amount? Okay, so it was 21,000. Okay, so we're talking about a $21,000 issue. Does someone want to make a motion in support of including the group? Mr. Kenyon moves, Mr. Surges seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
He's got here.
Oh, Hanson.
Just again, in looking for, the word fair was used yesterday. Were there any other applicants either within the non-for-profit pool or the small business pool that would have the same categorization? Is it a 501c6? Were there any others that were similar in nature that applied?
We can, I don't know I don't know the answer to that, but if that comes up, we'll bring that back for discussion.
I remember very early on in this group's organization, there was a 501c6 that presented to us from Aurora, and I don't know if they applied. And I also didn't know if there were any others built into the 50 some odd non-for-profits or the 250 small biz that would have been excluded, but now are in consideration if we're going to allow a grant to go to VIA.
All right, well, we can certainly bring that information back again. On the business grant side, the available funds, I think we would certainly have the ability to accommodate a similarly situated entity if one was identified.
I agree, and I'm in support of allowing them to be part of the program, but I don't want to see another similarly categorized, by tax code business or organization be kicked out because they didn't meet the initial criterion.
All right. All right, any further discussion, Ms. Thomas?
Just to go a step further, I agree with that, but I think we ought to be on the record extending a deadline for another, if there are any similar organizations that for some reason don't know that, haven't been following this process closely and find out today, tomorrow that they can now apply. I think we should be on the record with a deadline for those organizations if they're out there.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to include or to endorse the request. I think there's already a separate resolution that's moving on to the board, but this would just be a vote of support for that. Clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Is this a resolution for today or the one that we viewed yesterday?
It's an endorsement of the resolution.
Endorsement of the resolution.
Yes.
Hanson, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
All right, motion carries. All right, so in terms of the new business part of the agenda then, are there Fabiola or Mr. Lulvis, are there any specific resolutions that we would want to move forward other than the ones we've already voted on today?
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that both of the new business resolutions, number 1 and 2, should be voted on by the committee. This authorizes the execution of intergovernmental agreements, would allow us to, number 1 is for your municipal intergovernmental agreements, okay, as have been previously, the attachment that you previously got electronically. The resolution, the second one, would be authorizing the approval of the applications and the intergovernmental agreements with units of local government and fire protection districts. I would suggest that that should be as amended, which you just amended, specifying 83% reimbursement.
Okay.
But both of those should be voted on by the committee. That then would authorize our office to immediately distribute the packages to the intergovernmental agreements and everything to the other units to get them to execute it. And then when they came back, would allow the state's attorney to execute those immediately and have the reimbursements start flowing right away.
All right. So for purposes of clarification, at the beginning of the meeting, we talked about the process where application was submitted, the application was vetted, additional feedback was given, and then it was submitted to KEB for approval. KEB approved it, many of these applications, and once they come back, the next step is for us to sign an intergovernmental agreement with the applicant that covers the indemnity requirements and the audit documentation requirements. which is really where we're at with the municipalities and the other units of local government. So we need separate resolutions for each group in order for that process to get done. Once those are signed off, then they can submit their supporting documentation and the funds can flow out. So what I'll do is entertain a motion to approve the first resolution, which is authorizing the execution of approval of applications and intergovernmental agreements for the municipalities. Mr. Hanson moves, Mr. Sanchez seconds. Discussion.
Mr. Hochet,
Yes.
yeah, Doug Shefflow. So I have a question based on what Mr. Love has said. I think that what I heard before is that before the money flows, it's going to come to a final full county board vote, go through the auditor and the.
Well, I think this is essentially the vote to approve the intergovernmental agreements for the funding that's been deemed eligible per the attachments or the spreadsheets that have been disseminated. So I think this is technically that vote as it relates to those two components of applicant.
But it's not coming back to the full county board prior to.
Going to the full county board. If this resolution's passed, it goes on the county board agenda for approval.
Right, but then the money has to go on the, the payment list of distribution of funds that comes from the treasurer's office every month? Or no?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
So the individual check is posted, goes through the treasurer and the auditor, and then is on that list of, I can't think of what we call it, but where we're paying the bills.
Payment of claims or
Yeah,
whatever. I don't think,
exactly.
I'm not sure that necessarily would show up there, but, and in fact, most of those bills, I could be wrong, but many of those, I think we're ratifying the fact that we paid them. It's
Okay.
after the fact. So it may show up, but it isn't, I mean, what we're giving is the approval to do it in advance, and we're ratifying the fact that they were paid legitimately. Are you
Right.
suggesting we should have another step to come back and vote at the full board again?
Well, I thought that was the process. I thought I heard that earlier as well. That's all I'm saying. I mean, I think that the board could authorize distributions, delegate that to someone, but.
I think in the original enabling ordinance, when we approved the program, we authorized the disbursements to be made once the final approval was obtained. And this is really the approval of the allocation after the applications have been submitted and the requests have been categorized as eligible. So I would say that this is the point where if we're opposing it as a board, we should bring it up for discussion and either vote yes or no based on the outcome of that discussion. I wouldn't anticipate seeing this back at the board for a vote. It still would have to go through the process of whatever our treasurer and auditor have set up for dispersing payments that have been approved by the board. But I don't expect that the cities or the local units of government, if they had their documentation in order, would have to come back to us for approval.
Okay. Thank
All
you.
right. So we have a motion and a second. This is with respect to the municipal requests. When we submit this resolution, can we attach a copy of the eligible list just for education purposes? All right, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Okay, resolution is approved. The second resolution is a resolution authorizing approval of applications and intergovernmental agreements for the units of local government based on the amounts that we've approved here in our prior motions. So this resolution, when we're talking about this, there would be, I guess if we're talking about the order of resolutions, what we should do as a board is first vote on the changes to the programs that we approved here today. And once those are in place, then this resolution would incorporate those changes. Is there a motion to approve that? Mr. Sanchez, Mr. Surges seconds. Discussion here. Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Okay, resolution is approved. I believe item 3 was a placeholder. Is there anything that, any action on that, Mr. Lovelace, that we need to take?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right. So just for clarification, when we have resolutions that come from CARES Act Committee to the full board, we'll have a resolution amending the local government programs to increase the funding from roughly 1.25 to 1.85 with money coming from the contingency fund so that we can fully fund those. We'll have a motion to shift the 3.5 million plus or minus from the contingency fund to the fire district fund and fund those at 83%. From the unincorporated areas, correct. I'm sorry if I misspoke. And fund those. And then we'll have these other resolutions that allow us to implement those changes by providing the funding. All right. Okay, is there any other business for the committee this morning? Mr. Surges.
I did have a, just to represent a constituent, I did have a business reach out saying, you know, we're at just at 300,000. Is your rule hard and fast at 250? I have not responded to them, but I think the answer was yes. But Santa's Village has asked, you know, is there any consideration or wavering in that? And I would like to bring it here before I responded.
You're talking, you meant, I think you meant to say 2.5 million versus 3 million.
I'm sorry, yes.
All right. I know that was a concern going into the program. I had local businesses that were over the 2.5 million threshold, and we established the program based on the current criteria. You know, at this stage in the game, it's be very difficult to modify the rules to get everything in within the time frame because the business applications are very difficult and time intensive to evaluate.
Completely understood. Just wanted to take a stab.
Okay. Ms. Thomas?
Just to clarify, earlier the chairman was questioning potential costs for the consultant working on this assignment. Didn't we set a limit of $600,000 for that?
We have, that's the amount of funding, and the original contract with this outside consultant was, I think, less than half of that, but I'll get feedback on that and I'll report back to where we are on costs so that we get.
But I just wanted to clarify that we had set a cap.
Yes,
Okay.
that's the amount of funding we've allocated so far.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. Shefflow here.
Yes.
So I had just a general question, and it kind of, it's been maybe alluded to a little bit over the committee meeting, but and it's just the general equity of really what we're doing. Cliff kind of brought it up there with being over the annual revenue limit. So the amounts that we have in these, like the business grant program, that's an arbitrary figure that was chosen. You have to choose numbers, right? The application deadlines are arbitrary deadlines that were created. And I'm just wondering if there are, I'll use maybe the example of a fire district. We have some fire districts getting upward of $1 million, some getting very small amounts of what I'm hearing. Are there other fire districts who were a day late in their application that are being told, no, you don't get anything? I mean, that,
No.
I think we need
The
to.
answer to that is no, Doug. If we had a municipality that came in late, we would have brought it to the committee for consideration.
Okay, so there's some grace period, or because that's where I think we need to reach out to, you know, whoever's out there, if there are people out there that only within the funds allowed. I mean, we have a maximum dollars, so ultimately there's a maximum, but I just think we got to keep that in mind. I mean, to that, and then just to belabor it, I guess the VFWs and uh, what is it, American Legion, those sort of patriotic organizations, I think want to be included in some of this. They run bars and restaurants that presumed to be hit. And so I think there might be room that we can, reach out to other areas to the extent that money's available. That's all I had. Thanks.
All right. Any other comments for the meeting? Sir, did you want to address the committee? Sure.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you for recognizing me and giving me the opportunity. Mike Terrell, Village President, Campton Hills. Speaking on behalf of the municipalities, the question is we're coming up very close to the October 15th deadline. There has been a varied input back from the state's attorney's office on applications as accepted but not necessarily approved. Will there be a time prior to the October 15th deadline for which the municipalities will have a very, very clear, detailed picture as to where they stand relative to their application and the funds that will be allocated? And I ask that question so that if there's a modification that needs to be done prior to the 15th, there's an opportunity to do so.
Well, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the municipal applications that were, well, I don't know. Let me have Fabiola address that because I don't want to misspeak.
The packets that you have here are all the recommended eligible amounts. All of the municipalities basically met their 100% allocated amount, but the exception of a few that have not, and those that did not apply, everybody's met their allocation.
So as it relates to the Village of Campton Hills, the Village of Campton Hills allocation was $652,000, and the amount that was deemed eligible is even though the application was for more than that, as other municipalities submitted more requests. At this point, what is going to the full board for approval is the full allocation of the $652,000.
Okay, so the need to make modifications is really a moot point.
Correct. Now, there are a few municipalities that either didn't have their amounts eligible or deemed eligible where there could be a conflict, and we're following up with them to try to get those clarified so we don't have a dispute, so there's 100% allocation. Just to give you some perspective, out of the $27.7 million that was allocated to municipalities, 27.4 is eligible. So we're dealing with about $283,000, and we're trying to get clarification before that date so we can get everything finalized.
All right, very good.
But
That answers the workload on our side for round two.
Right.
All right, thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Surges.
Chairman, in terms of Santa's Village, I pulled up the email and I just wanted to clearly communicate it for the constituents. Their concern was that the $2.5 million threshold for 2019, they're admitting that in 2019, they were a $4.1 million company. In 2020, they are below 300,000. That's how devastated this has been with them as a seasonal business. And their request was to say, is there any consideration whatsoever to be done with that? They don't meet it in 2019, but in 2020, they're decimated. And I just bring that to the committee. And I apologize for not stating that clearly. I should have reread it before I opened my mouth. So.
All right. The next time for a meeting, and we certainly can schedule an earlier meeting. If there's something that comes up in the course of the application process where there's conflicts that come up with eligibility or otherwise that we need a meeting to address those specifically, I'll call a meeting. But the next scheduled meeting that the consultant and the state's attorney's office is requesting would be October 26th. Is that correct? At what time? In the afternoon, is I'm sorry, the 26th is,
It's Monday.
it's a Monday, so we would do it in the afternoon at 3 o'clock. Is that convenient? All right, so we'll send out a notice for October 26th at 3 o'clock. If there's something that comes up as this matter moves to the full board for consideration, certainly that could cause us to need to have a meeting sooner, which we will do. All right, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Hoshait. Could you and the committee give an instruction to everybody who's involved in this process that, all correspondence that goes to, or memos, emails that go to CAC members also include the chairman's office, so that I'm aware of, there are some pieces that where they've been distributed, and I'm not aware that I've received them, and I'd like to
Yeah,
receive
I
them.
mean, my instruction has always been, just so you know, that, when the question's been asked, do we do it just to the committee or the full board? I say everyone, just so there's certainly not a hidden agenda here. And now, we really got to get focused here on getting these funds out. We're going to, as we come back for our next committee meeting, we're going to have a better handle on how some of the other applications have been vetted and if there's additional contingency funds available. We'll also have an update. I'll try to work with Fabiola early this next week to get more definitive feedback about what's been applied for on the business side and the not-for-profit side, because I know that there's committee members that are particularly interested on the not-for-profit side and see what we have there, okay? All right, if there's no further business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Sanchez moves, Mr. Surges seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for participating and being here.
Always think someone tries to confuse everything. Well, maybe 3.
I don't want to talk. It's not the microphone. I'll talk to you sometime.
Yeah.